Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing, testing, testing.
Okay, I'd use to move through it if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I am down with that.
Okay. A quorum being present, the Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Counterterrorism and Intelligence will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today for consideration of H.R. 2471, the Terrorist Release Announcement to Counter-Extremist Recidivism Act, H.R. 2468, the Unifying DHS Intelligence Enterprise Act, H.R. 2433, the Homeland Security Assessment of Terrorist Use of Virtual Currencies Act, H.R. 2443, the Department of Homeland Security Classified Facility Inventory Act, H.R. 2442, the Office of State and Local Law Enforcement Information Sharing Review Act, H.R. 2454, the Department of Homeland Security Data Framework of 2017, H.R. 2453, the DHS Intelligence Rotational Assignment Program of 2017, H.R. 2470, the Homeland Threat Assessment Act, and H.R. 2427, the Pathways to Improving Homeland Security at the Local Level Act. It is my understanding that a request has been made to amend two of the bill's short titles, so without objection, the bill title for H.R. 2433 is amended to read the Homeland Security Assessment of Terrorist Use of Virtual Currencies Act, and the short title of H.R. 2442 is amended to read the Federal Information Resource to Strengthen Ties with State and Local Law Enforcement Act of 2017, and I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Several months ago, at the beginning of the subcommittee's first hearing of the 115th Congress, I noted that we have an opportunity to carefully but considerably improve the homeland security of the United States. Whenever possible, this must include bipartisan cooperation and an eye on the vital issue of the safety and security of Americans. As the subcommittee now convenes for the first markup of the 115th Congress, we are indeed seizing this opportunity in a bipartisan fashion. The bills under consideration today build upon constructive congressional oversight. They contain needed improvements to the Department's intelligence enterprise and guidance and authorizations that will serve the national security of the United States. Ultimately, these bills will improve the safety and security of the American people. Of the 9 bills under consideration today, 2 require the Department to produce much-needed threat assessments on pressing Homeland Security issues. H.R. 2470, offered by Congressman Rogers, requires the Department to offer an annual comprehensive Homeland Security threat assessment. This will provide a common threat picture across the Department and for federal, state, and local partners. H.R. 2433, offered by Ranking Member Rice, requires DHS to evaluate how terrorist networks are using or could use virtual currencies to support their activities. 3 of the bills before us today seek to enhance coordination and information sharing within the Department's intelligence enterprise. H.R. 2454, the Department of Homeland Security Data Framework, offered by Congressman Hurd, going back to the past, Congressman Hurd, provides statutory authorization and guidance for the Department's ongoing initiative to develop the data framework, which will consolidate DHS-wide data sets in order to improve unclassified and classified analytic capabilities. H.R. 2468, the Unifying DHS Intelligence Enterprise Act, sponsored by Congressman Perry, requires that the Department provide guidance for the analysis and dissemination of information across the Department's intelligence enterprise. This will be the first time such comprehensive guidance is given by the Department's Chief Intelligence Officer. Additionally, H.R. 2453, the DHS Intelligence Rotational Assignment Program Act, will further professionalize the workforce of the Department's intelligence enterprise and help to foster the quote-unquote one DHS culture across the various component intelligence offices. The remaining 4 bills provide support to the Department's state and local law enforcement partners. The Tracer Act, H.R. 2471, introduced by Congressman Rutherford, addresses a major issue identified during the subcommittee's hearing on prison radicalization last Congress, which is to ensure that Fusion Center partners receive advance notice when federal inmates with terrorism convictions are about to be released back into their communities. H.R. 2442, offered by Representative Jackson Lee, requires an annual report on the work of the Department's state and local law enforcement office. H.R. 2427, sponsored by Representative Demings, authorizes the Department's production of a catalog of activities and services across the Department that may be useful to state and local law enforcement. Lastly, H.R. 2443, the DHS Classified Facility Inventory Act, offered by Representative Barletta, requires the DHS Chief Security Officer to conduct an inventory of existing DHS-certified secure facilities and then share this information as appropriate with DHS components and with state and locals. Independently, each of these bills will improve the homeland security of the United States. Taken together, they provide a major contribution to the safety and security of the American people. I want to thank all the members of the subcommittee, especially my ranking member, for their work to develop these important bills, and thank the staff and Congresswoman Rice's staff for their bipartisan cooperation in the lead up to today's markup. I'm hopeful we'll be able to pass all 9 bills under consideration and have many of them included in the full committee DHS authorization bill, and I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, my colleague from Long Island, New York, Ms. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to consider these measures today. First, I'd like to discuss my bill, H.R. 2433, the Homeland Security Assessment of Terrorist Use of Virtual Currencies Act. We know that most large-scale terrorist funding occurs through traditional methods like cash-based money transfers, but as noted in a new report by the Center for a New American Security, evidence suggests that the terrorist groups have also used virtual currencies to support themselves and fund their operations. Virtual currency systems could prove to be more appealing for terrorists because these systems offer high-speed and low-cost networks and access to users all over the world. For example, we know that terrorist groups in Gaza have solicited support in Bitcoin, and there has been at least one report that ISIS has used the cryptocurrency as well. There is concern that virtual currencies may be particularly attractive to lone wolf terrorists because of the smaller scales of funding needed to execute an attack. We are still in the early stages of evaluating whether terrorists will use virtual currencies as one-off sources of payments and transfers, or if this will ultimately become the preferred terror finance method on a much larger scale. In order to review this emerging threat and financing method, my bill would require the DHS Office of Intelligence and Analysis to develop and disseminate a threat assessment regarding terrorist use of virtual currencies. Further, to ensure that this information is shared throughout the law enforcement community, my bill requires the threat assessment be shared with state, local, and tribal law enforcement, including those offices that operate within state, local, and regional areas. Today, we will also be considering several bills focused on improving information sharing between state and local law enforcement agencies by utilizing fusion center networks and bolstering the DHS Office of Intelligence and Analysis, as well as the Office of State and Local Law Enforcement. As we commemorate Police Week, I think it's a fitting time for us to focus on empowering our state and local law enforcement partners and providing the resources they need to do their jobs. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting these bills. I thank Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Rice. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. By agreement between the Chair and Ranking Member, the subcommittee, by unanimous consent, shall use an amendment roster today.
Reserving the right to object, and I will not object, would the Chair please explain our agreement regarding the amendment roster? I yield to the Chair.
I thank the gentlewoman and all the subcommittee members for agreeing to the use of an amendment roster. We have agreed that the bills be open to amendment at any point and that we will take up amendments in the order listed on the roster. The Chair will allow members to offer amendments listed on the roster out of order to the extent practicable and in a manner not prohibited by House or committee rules. Amendment not listed on the roster may be considered at the conclusion of consideration of the roster. Chair would also note that several of the bills in the roster have no amendments, and so in the hope that we could expedite the markup, I intend to ask unanimous consent to consider those bills without any amendments en bloc. I would still plan to recognize each member present that has a bill included as part of the agreement. The bills I will be asking unanimous consent to consider en bloc are H.R. 2443, H.R. 2468, H.R. 2454, H.R. 2453, H.R. 2470, H.R. 2433, H.R. 2442, and H.R. 2427. Additionally, it is my understanding there is bipartisan agreement on the amendments on the roster. Members who have more than one amendment to a bill may be submitted to offer their amendments en bloc if they wish.
I thank the Chair for his explanation and withdraw my reservation.
I now call up H.R. 2471, the Terrorist Release Announcements to Counter Extremist Recidivism Act. The bill was circulated in advance. Printed copies are available. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 2471.
Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. Is there any discussion on the bill? There being no further discussion of the bill, the subcommittee will move to consideration of the amendments. Per the roster agreement, listed first is an amendment offered by the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Rice. Would the gentlelady like to offer her amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have two amendments at the desk and ask that they be considered en bloc at this time.
Without objection, so ordered. The clerk shall report the en bloc amendment.
En bloc amendment to H.R. 2471, offered by Ms. Rice.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and Ms. Rice is recognized for 5 minutes on the en bloc amendment.
Mr. Chairman, my first amendment seeks to provide clarity that this bill does not direct DHS to create a watch list or database of convicted terrorists who are to be released. This is an important protection because it underscores our commitment to share this information as appropriate with state, local, and regional fusion centers without establishing a list or registry of individuals. Adoption of my second amendment will require DHS to conduct a privacy impact assessment, which is a tool used to mitigate privacy risks by informing the public about what personally identifiable information will be collected, how that information will be used, and how it will be shared and protected. This amendment requires the DHS Secretary to consult with the Officer for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties and the Officer for Privacy to further assure the public that these activities will not violate anyone's constitutionally protected rights. These amendments will ensure that our state and local law enforcement partners receive the information they need to protect our communities, while also ensuring that we do not infringe upon an individual's constitutional rights. I understand that Mr. Rutherford has agreed to accept these amendments, and I appreciate his support, and with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there any further discussion on the en bloc amendment? There being no further discussion, the question now occurs on the en bloc amendment offered by Ms. Rice to H.R. 2471. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the en bloc amendment is agreed to. There are no other amendments listed on the roster. Are there any other amendments to the bill? Hearing none, the question now occurs on agreeing to the bill, H.R. 2471 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to. The question now occurs on reporting the bill, H.R. 2471 as amended, to full committee with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table, and staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes. Now, I'll call up H.R. 2443, H.R. 2468, H.R. 2454, H.R. 2453, H.R. 2470, H.R. 2433, H.R. 2442, and H.R. 2427, and ask unanimous consent that they be considered en bloc. Without objection, so ordered. The bills were circulated in advance. Printed
Chairman.
copies are available. The clerks will designate the bills. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with.
Mr. Chair-
H.R. 2443, to require an inventory of all facilities certified by the Department of Homeland Security to host infrastructure or systems classified above the secret level and for other purposes. H.R. 2433, to
Without
direct...
objection, the reading of the bill is dispensed with. And considered as read. Okay. And I recognize, and open to amendment at any point, and I recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, for a statement on the bill, H.R. 2468.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to offer H.R. 2468, the Unifying DHS Intelligence Enterprise Act. On December 13, 2016, the Committee on Homeland Security released a detailed evaluation of the Department's intelligence enterprise covering all component intelligence programs. This report identified a lack of unified policy around intelligence analysis and dissemination within the Department that undermined the role of DHS within the intelligence community. After receiving suggestions from former Department officials and experts, this report recommended that the Department should develop and issue departmental intelligence doctrines using relevant component policies and IC directives as a starting point. H.R. 2468 directs the Chief Intelligence Officer, the CINT, to develop and disseminate an intelligence doctrine across DHS. The doctrine shall be department-wide guidance for processing, analysis, production, and dissemination of Homeland Security information and terrorism information. This is not a new staffing billet and does not provide additional hiring authority. I ask members of this committee to support this bill and I yield back the balance of the time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, is recognized for 5 minutes on her bill, H.R. 2442.
Let me thank the chairman and ranking member particularly for helping to bring this bill forward, and particularly to bring this bill forward in National Police Week. This week, of course, we mourn the loss of those who have fallen in the name of serving this nation, and as well, we recognized how important local law enforcement, state law enforcement are to the security of this nation, but as well to the aid of citizens during very difficult times of man-made and natural disasters. This week, I heard from my Chief Art Acevedo in the Judiciary Committee on the issues of police-community relations. This important agency or office in the Department of Homeland Security, the Office of State and Local Law Enforcement, is crucial in our communication with our local law enforcement. And so my legislation provides for the opportunity for transparency and oversight of the work of the DHS Office of State and Local Law Enforcement by requiring that an annual report of its activities be provided to Congress. This office is a primary coordinator, liaison, and advocate for state, local, tribal, and territorial law enforcement. The office was created based on recommendations from the 9/11 Commission, of which I was serving on this committee at that time. It serves as a primary liaison between DHS and non-federal law enforcement agencies across the country. We're well aware during 9/11 in New York, not only the brave men and women who were there, who stood up and stood forward to be able to save lives, but also to continue the recovery and search and recovery for those who were lost. We recognize that the ongoing relationship started there with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And over the years, through natural disasters and man-made disasters, local law enforcement have been crucial. The office also leads coordination of DHS policies related to state, local, tribal, and territorial law enforcement's role in preventing, preparing for, protecting against, and responding to natural disasters, acts of terrorism, and other man-made disasters. In my district alone, there are the ports, there's the energy sector. All of those may be subject to terrorist threats. So therefore, as I ask my colleagues to support this legislation, the report required under my bill will include data about the coordination and information with state and local law enforcement, establishing and reporting performance and metrics, feedback received from state, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies about the effectiveness of the office. I think the office is valuable. I think this will be a valuable report for the Congress, and it certainly will be a recognition that we believe this office is crucial to our collaboration, communication with our state and local and tribal law enforcement agencies. I ask my colleagues to support the bill, and I do want to take note of the fact that Congresswoman Val Demings also co-sponsored my bill. Thank you so very much. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back, and the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hurd, is recognized for 5 minutes on his bill, H.R. 2454.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know too well, nearly 16 years after the September 11, 2001 terror attacks, most Americans would be surprised at the number of information sharing stovepipes that still exist. Many of the remaining challenges result from technology hurdles and legal restrictions on sharing. Nowhere is that more true than within the Department of Homeland Security, where 22 component agencies were brought together with different missions and legal authorities and restrictions. The DHS data framework was designed to bring total vital DHS data sets, including travel and cargo information and investigative data, and many others together. DHS personnel have noted that the burdensome red tape associated with bringing together various databases has hampered searching and information vetting capabilities across the department for years. The data framework is the big data solution to bring these systems together for easy searches that automatically incorporate the necessary privacy and civil liberty restrictions. The other important element of the framework is the duplication of the platform on a classified network to allow classified analysis and vetting against intelligence information. Counterterror analysts and law enforcement across the U.S. know that while some of the data used to fight terrorism is classified, most of it is not. This has made cross-referencing between law enforcement and intelligence difficult. The data framework directly addresses this challenge by creating a mirrored database. Given the potential value the data framework can offer, as well as the vital need to ensure that the data is protected, congressional authorization is needed. The underlying bill supports the ongoing efforts at the department by authorizing the program, but also adds in requirements for a 2-year completion date, requirements for additional security and privacy protections, as well as mandates for DHS component agencies to fully participate and share information within the framework. I was pleased to incorporate many of the suggested edits provided by the department, and I look forward to working out any remaining issues as we move the bill forward. This bill is yet another small step that we can take to bring our federal government into the 21st century. It strengthens our big data analytical capabilities and ensures that the men and women at the Department of Homeland Security have the tools they need to keep our country safe. I urge my colleagues to support this important measure, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman from Texas. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized to discuss the bills? Hearing none, we will now move to consideration of the amendments to the bills in the en bloc. There are no amendments listed on the roster. Are there any other amendments to any of the bills? Hearing none, the question now occurs in agreeing to the bills. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bills are agreed to. Without objection, the bills are reported to full committee with a favorable recommendation, and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. This concludes consideration of the bills. Notice for today's markup. In closing, I would like to thank the members and their staff, especially the ranking member, on both sides for the bipartisan legislation approved by the subcommittee today. In particular, I would like to extend the subcommittee's thanks to John Dickhouse, who has served the committee as Deputy Chief Clerk. This is John's last markup with this committee, and we wish him well. Good luck. Thanks for all your work. I look forward to continuing this effort as we move the bills to the full committee for consideration. There being no further business, the Subcommittee on Counterterrorism and Intelligence stands adjourned.